Are you sure it's not your USB port?
know
Because
what it
every
is.
once in a while, not on this one, but on my other computer, I have to shut it down, remove all the USB ports, and then start it back up
And
again.
it might, I don't know what it is, I just
Yeah.
know that it's hit or miss. Like if I plug it in on this one and it doesn't,
Uh-huh.
I unplug it and I plug it in on this one. And then sometimes
It's
it
your
does,
USB ports going out.
sometimes it does,
Yeah.
sometimes it doesn't. And so I don't want you to think it's anything that you
Well, it's
did.
okay. I'll do it this way, because that, what I
And then that way I can
put
just save it
there
right to the
is
file.
their word transcripts,
Gotcha.
and you need them in PDF form, actually. So
That's fine. Whatever way.
I'll send it to your
That
email.
would be wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Stay safe. Yeah? What's up? Okay. You all right? Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so, but I'll still do that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I was just showing her that we filed the O&1 on all the transcripts, and she said she hadn't received them, so I was showing her the answer from who filed them.
Remain seated, come to order. Superior Court of Henry County back in session.
All right, y'all ready to move on?
Good afternoon, Judge. Can you hear me okay?
Pardon?
I'm gonna move this way, because I
Okay,
have
yeah.
my double mask.
You moved there.
I did. I know, it's very hard to see you around this corner.
That's a huge.
When we started yesterday, I'm not quite sure if we put on the record not only the title of the motions that we were preparing to do over the next few days, or the
I'm
number.
not sure I did, but I know the motion to suppress the statement was on the record.
Okay, so obviously things have changed, but for the purposes of the transcript and to just keep us, I think, in order, if it's okay with the court, I just want to put the title of the motion and the motion number.
All right. I know I didn't do the motion number, that's for sure.
Okay,
Which one was the motion to suppress the statement? 69, 73B, or 71B?
so 71B is the motion to suppress McIntyre's statements and motion for an order excluding involuntary admissions and confessions. And then 72 was the motion to suppress McIntyre's statements and for a pretrial Jackson v. Dental hearing. And Ms. Rudy was doing those motions jointly. Is that right? Okay. As it relates to motion 69B, the motion to suppress all evidence obtained in the course of any illegal search and seizure, that's the motion that Mr. Stadelska is going to handle shortly. And then motion 73, the motion to suppress the arrest warrant. That motion, we are going to just rest on that motion. We are not going to provide the court with any further evidence. Okay?
All right.
Thank you, Judge. Did you hear all that? Mr.
I did. Thank
Okay.
you.
I have a double mask, that's why I'm asking.
Thank you.
Not a problem.
I'm ready if y'all
State's ready, Your Honor.
All right.
are. Which one do you want to start with?
Do y'all have a preference? Same with this? I'm thinking if we could do the, I was gonna say the arrest warrant first,
Okay.
since that came first.
So that was my announcement on the rest of that, is that we're gonna just rest on our motion. And so we're gonna just handle the search and seizure, illegal search and seizure.
Well, if you're resting on your motion, I still would like the judge to hear, I believe that the judge would have to hear evidence, even just based on your motion.
Sure. It's my
Unless you're
motion.
withdrawing the motion, I believe that the
Right,
judge would
so-
still have to, and Judge, I'm sorry, we're talking to each other, I should probably be talking to the court.
That's fine.
Unless the defense is withdrawing their motion to suppress the arrest warrant, their motion number 73, which I've heard that they are not, they are just going to rest on the motion, then with that, I believe that the court would still need to have evidence to consider whether or not their motion that they are resting on is valid and complete, or whether it is incorrect. And I believe that we would still have to have the detective testify with regards to that, unless the court is wanting to make a ruling just on the motion and just on what you have.
I haven't got the warrant in front of me, but
I have certified copies
it's
of
been a
them.
while since I've actually issued an arrest warrant. I didn't do that every day, but when I did, I always made sure that if I took any testimony, that I checked the box, that there was testimony outside the bounds of the affidavit taken. If that's the case, then definitely we need some testimony. If it was based on the affidavit alone, I'm not sure why you would need any testimony.
Well, it was based on, according to the detective, my understanding is it was based on the affidavit and additional oral testimony that he gave to the judge.
Then you would need to present some testimony.
I believe that's correct. Thank you, Judge.
We'll withdraw the motion now.
Oh, there you do.
There isn't any, evidence that I'm going to.
Motion number 73, filed motion to suppress arrest warrant. Originally filed in 2017, issue CR 73-AM. And subsequently, I believe, taken in, incorporated into the current indictment of 2021 issue CR 630. Is withdrawn by the defense. That leaves the motion to suppress evidence.
All right, Your Honor.
It is the very same detective, I don't know.
It is, Your Honor. It is. And if I can, as he's coming in, if I can just let him know that we're not doing that motion, that we're just going to switch to this one, so he can orient himself. Shall I call him in, Your Honor?
You may.
Thank you.
Sworn in this very same case yesterday, so I don't think it's really necessary for them to be re-sworn. This is a different motion, same case. So I think mine got still under oath. And still subject to cross-examination in that other motion. But if you feel more comfortable swearing him in, you're more than welcome to do so. I've not done any research on this.
Your Honor, I'll just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go ahead and swear him in. Thank you.
Right.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay, you can have a seat. Could you go ahead and please state and spell your name for the record once again?
David Roy, Lecroy.
Okay. And are you still a sergeant with the Henry County Police Department?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, you just testified yesterday, is that correct?
That is,
All that information, I'm sorry, I need to cut it off.
that's correct.
Okay, so all that information you gave us yesterday still applies today?
It is.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about after you obtained, after you interviewed Matthew Baker, did you then seek an arrest warrant as well as a search warrant for Mr. Baker's home?
I did.
You got this one? Aaron, may I approach?
You may.
Thank you. Sergeant McCrory, I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 6 for identification. Do you recognize that? And Your Honor, just at this point, the state will be tendering State's Exhibit 6. It is a certified copy of the search warrant. I just would like Sergeant LaCroix to identify that.
That is the search warrant that I applied for with the Henry County Magistrate Court.
And Your Honor, as I said, it's a certified copy. It is a certified copy, so it's self-authenticating. It is 2016-319 SW. It is a certified copy of the search warrant for 3300 Highway 81 East in McDonough, which, as we've established previously, is the defendant's home.
Any objection?
No objection.
That's it. We'll be in.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to leave this up here with us.
Okay.
All right. And Detective McCrory, did you go to, was it Judge Brown that you sought out to seek that, to get that arrest warrant as well as that search warrant?
That is correct.
Okay. And is Judge Brown a magistrate here in Henry County?
He was a magistrate judge at this time. I believe he is a state court judge.
Here in Henry
Here
County?
in Henry County. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
at the time he was a magistrate.
At the time, he was a magistrate court judge here in Henry County. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, when you sought that search warrant, when you're looking for, under the list of items that you're searching for, right there in the middle of that first page, did you enumerate the items that you were looking for?
I did.
And what were the items that you were interested in finding to see if they were in Mr. Baker's home?
Firearms, bullets, bullet casings, clothing containing DNA evidence to include blood, hair, saliva, etc.
Okay. And when you went to, and you did your search warrant and you filled out your affidavit for the search warrant, did you include on there your background and qualifications?
I did.
Did you include on there the location to be searched? I know we talked about 3300 Highway 81 East in McDonough. Did you include on there a description of that location?
I did.
And did you specifically include on there the items that you were searching for? Are those the items that you just read off?
I did.
Did you include on there that this was for a murder that you were investigating?
I did.
Did you include on there facts establishing probable cause for this search warrant?
I did.
Okay. And did you give that information to Judge Brown at the time?
I did.
Did you further swear this out under oath before the judge?
I did.
And did you give the judge any additional information with regards to probable cause on there?
I believe there was clarification questions asked as far as what information was from Mr. Baker, but everything as far as was in there was warranted. There was some clarification questions, if I remember correctly, that Judge Brown asked.
Okay. And so in that affidavit, in the factual basis or the probable cause portion of it, did you mention that there had been multiple murders with regards to over at Moccasin Gap Road?
I did.
Did you put in your affidavit that it was believed that Mr. Koski was involved?
I did.
Did you put in there that based on information you received from other witnesses that Matthew Baker was in the home at the time with Mr. Koski?
I did.
Did you put in there that Mr. Koski confessed to the shootings and the murders?
I did.
Did you put in there that Mr. Baker Mr. Koski asked Mr. Baker to meet him at the house again before the murders? And specifically, I'm referring to your affidavit, the page, I guess it's the second page of your affidavit listing the probable cause, where it says Mr. Koski confessed to remaining at the incident location and had Matthew Baker meet him at the house.
I did.
Did you tell the judge additional information that Matthew Baker indicated to you in your interview with him that he was the other person that was in the house with Jacob Koski?
I did state to Judge Brown that Mr. Baker did admit to entering into the house with Mr. Koski being the second subject that was seen by the witness coming down the hallway after the shooting stopped.
Did you inform the judge of that witness who was in that bedroom hiding and saw Jacob Koski and another male coming down the hall?
I did.
Did you inform the judge that that witness indicated that Mr. Koski and the other male seemed to be looking for other people and working together?
So that it appeared they were going from room to room until they went to the bedroom where he was hiding at, coming down the hallway, going from room to room, excuse me, until they entered the bedroom which he was in.
Okay.
Appeared to be working in tandem.
I'm sorry, say that last part?
Appeared to be working in tandem.
Okay, working in tandem. So was the judge aware of that during this process when you were swearing out this search warrant?
Yeah, he was.
And did you tell the judge that at the time the other witness, the male witness who was there, was unable to identify who that person with Mr. Koski was?
I did.
Did you tell him that later on in your interview with Mr. Baker, he admitted that he was the person that was with Mr. Koski?
I did.
Did you tell the judge that at one point in Mr. Koski's interview, he said that Mr. Baker gave him the second gun when he ran out of bullets in the first gun?
I believe the term as far as that was used with Koski's statement was that he had Baker holding on to one of the guns, and when Mr. Koski emptied the gun that he had in his hand, he turned and took the second gun from Mr. Baker and then proceeded to use that weapon as well.
And did you inform the judge of that?
I did.
Did you inform the judge that Mr. Koski had indicated to you where at least one of the firearms was?
I did. That was one of the charges as far as that were placed as far as on Mr. Koski. Explained to the judge we knew where the weapons had come from.
Did you indicate to the judge that you were trying to locate one of the firearms still?
Yes.
And did you indicate to the judge that based on the circumstances, you believe that that's why you were seeking this search warrant partially?
Judge, I'm going to have to object. Every single question so far has been a leading question, and I would just ask that the questions be rephrased so that the witness is actually testifying instead of just affirming all of the statements by the state.
I can re-ask the questions, Judge. I can have the detective read the affidavit into the record. Could you go ahead and starting on the portion of your affidavit that has the probable cause, could you go ahead and starting at the top of that page, starting on October 27th, 2016, could you go ahead and start reading, and I may interrupt you with questions.
Okay. On October 27th, 2016, I responded to I'm sorry, I have a tendency to do that. I apologize. On October 27th, 2016, I responded to 635 Moccasin Gap Road, Jackson, Georgia, 30233, in reference to a person shot called. I was advised by Sergeant Gotti that 7 people at the location had been shot and 3 subjects were deceased, with a 4th subject being airlifted to the hospital that was not likely to survive. There was a witness at the location, Mackenzie June Walton. Ms. Walton stated that she was at the location with several friends just hanging out. Her half-brother, Jacob Koski, was also at the location. Ms. Walton stated at one point there was some sort of argument between Jacob and some other people there, and Jacob left. Sometime later, Ms. Walton stated she was on the back porch smoking a cigarette and a car came down the driveway. She stated one of the people there had left to take a female named Emily home. As she hears the vehicle, she stated she saw Jacob Koski and another unknown male in the wood line near the residence. Shortly after that, she hears approximately 10 gunshots from inside the house. Ms. Walton stated she ran and hid in one of the outbuildings at the location. She states that she did not see if Jacob entered the house and had no knowledge of what went on inside the house. Sometime after this, Ms. Walton receives a text from Jacob on her phone. The content of the text was to the effect of, "I let you go because I love you." Ms. Walton said she talked to Jacob on the phone and he told her that, grammatical here. Talked to Jacob on the phone and he told her that had gone somewhere in Jackson, but supposedly no outright confession had been made. The owners of the location are said to be out of town and no one was supposed to be there. Another juvenile witness was at the location and stated he was invited to the location by one of the victims. He got to the location when everyone was outside drinking beer and just kind of goofing off. He stated it got later in the evening and he had to work in the morning, so he went to sleep in the back bedroom of the house. He was awakened to the sounds of gunshots and a scream. The juvenile witness wrapped himself up in a blanket and hid in the room. He stated that he saw Jacob with another unknown male come back down the hallway where he was shortly after the gunshot ceased. He stated the other male was wearing all black and looked like he had a mask on. He did not see who was actually shooting.
Can I pause you for one moment? When you interviewed Matthew Baker, did he tell you whether or not he was with Jacob Koski walking down the hall?
He did.
Did he indicate to you whether or not what he was wearing when he was walking down the hall?
Said that he wasn't wearing all black, but he did have a black and color hoodie on.
And did he indicate to you whether or not he was in the house with Jacob Koski at the time that this was all happening?
He did.
Now, he also indicated to you that he didn't do anything, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, but he does confirm that this male that is walking down the hall that this young male, this juvenile male saw, he confirms that that's him.
Correct.
Okay, go ahead, you can continue.
After obtaining a search warrant for 635 Moxon Gap Road, the search of the residence revealed the following. Upon walking into the front door, it was determined that Destiny Olinger was found laying on the ground in the kitchen with 3 circular-shaped effects suspected to be gunshot wounds on her head. To the left of the kitchen in the dining room, the following 3 victims were laying on the ground. Keith Gibson was lying on the dining room floor face down with his feet partially in the kitchen, with 1 circular-shaped effect in his back and 1 circular-shaped effect on his head, suspected to be gunshot wounds. Matthew Hicks was lying face down with his head next to Keith Gibson and his feet facing the rear patio. Mr. Hicks had 1 circular-shaped effect on his head, suspected to be a gunshot wound. Sophia Bullard was laying face down on the floor on the other side of the dining room table from Matthew Hicks with her head towards the kitchen and her feet towards the patio. Sophia Bullard had appeared to be a star-shaped effect exposing brain matter suspected to be a gunshot wound. During further interviews with Jude Walton, it was determined that Matthew Baker, who resides at 3300 Highway 81 East McDonough, Georgia 30252, was possibly with Jacob Koski during the incident. Based on this information, officers were dispatched to 3300 Highway 81 East at approximately 9:59 a.m. and observed a 1996 Jeep Cherokee bearing Georgia tag Paul Sam Zebra 5769, containing approximately 4 subjects: Matthew Baker, Jacob Williams, Kayla Head, and Brooke Knight leaving the residence. The vehicle turned around and came back to the residence where it was stopped by officers in the driveway of 3300 Highway 81 East. All subjects were detained and then interviewed at the Henry County Police Department.
Let me pause you for one moment there. Is that I know we've suspended the motion to suppress statements, but is that the hearing that we've been doing referencing this incident in the driveway?
It is.
All right, go ahead, continue please.
While the subjects were at the Henry County Police Department's McDonough precinct, Jacob Koski contacted dispatch and advised he wanted to turn himself in. Officers met with Mr. Koski at the firehouse located on Jonesboro Road, McDonough, Georgia, and he was transported to the Henry County Police Department's McDonough precinct. During the interviews with Mr. Koski, Mr. Baker, Mr. Williams, Ms. Head, and Ms. Knight, following information was obtained. Mr. Koski confessed to remaining at the incident location and had Matthew Baker meet with him at the house. Matthew Baker was driven to the incident location by Kayla Head and the following passengers: Jacob Williams and Brooke Knight. Mr. Baker was dropped off in the roadway in front of the dirt driveway of 635 Moxon Gap Road. Mr. Koski confessed to coming in the residence with 2 revolver firearms he previously had stolen from the residence the day prior. Mr. Kosky confessed to telling everyone to get on the ground upon entering the residence and telling his sister, Jude Walton, to leave. Mr. Kosky confesses to shooting Destiny Older in the head twice, and continuing to shoot Gibson, Matthew Hicks, and Sophia Buller in the head at close range. Mr. Kosky stated he then told Matthew Baker to help him search the house because he knew there was another male in the residence. But when they could not find him, they left the scene.
I'm going to pause you for one moment. When you were interviewing Matthew Baker, did he indicate to you that when he went back to that residence with Jacob Kosky, that he knew that something was going to happen?
He did.
Did he indicate to you whether or not Jacob Kosky had been in touch with him and asked him to meet him there at the house?
Stated that the contact was to Miss Knight and Miss Head through their phone, stating that to come get him, that he needed them to come back to the residence. He did not initially speak to Mr. Baker directly. It was through Miss Knight and Miss Head, as they were the only ones that had cell phones.
Okay. And when they got back to the residence, did Matthew Baker indicate to you that he went up to the house with Jacob Kosky?
He did.
Okay. Did you inform the judge of those items as well, or did you not inform the judge of that?
I did through the clarification questions he was asking.
All right, go ahead. You can continue reading.
When Kayla Head heard the gunshots, she left the scene in her vehicle, a 1996 Jeep Cherokee with Jacob Williams and Brooke Knight. Mr. Kosky said he called Kayla Head and demanded she come pick him up. Kayla Head then turned around and picked up Mr. Kosky and Mr. Baker. Mr. Kosky said he directed Kayla through the back roads to Highway 81 East towards Highway 212 and threw one of the firearms out of the vehicle. Mr. Kosky said he had Kayla Head drop him off at Highway 81 East near State Route 212, where he threw the other firearm over a bridge into the river. Kayla Head, Jacob Williams, Matthew Baker, and Brooke Knight then returned to 3300 Highway 81 East. After searching the bridge area, the second firearm was located. The first firearm has yet to have been located. In the residence of 3300, there is believed to be the clothing worn by Mr. Baker in this incident that could contain DNA evidence and the other weapon in question as well.
All right. When you were speaking to Matthew Baker in your interview with him, did he indicate to you what clothing he was wearing? I think you testified earlier that he did.
He had corrected that he was not wearing all black when he came back into the house, but he did have a black and colored hoodie on.
Right. When you were talking to Matthew Baker, did he indicate to you whether or not they had, prior to leaving that morning when officers stopped them, did he indicate to you whether or not he had been at the residence all night?
When I spoke with him in the driveway, he stated that after they were told to leave from the house at what he described as a country place, they were there at the house for the rest of the night.
Except for when
they received the phone, when Miss Head or Miss Knight received the phone call from Jacob saying to come pick him up.
And did you let the magistrate judge know this additional information?
I did.
When you did the search of Matthew, did you go ahead and execute the search warrant then at 3300?
Search warrant.
Okay. And were you able to find the black sweatshirt that he had just worn the night before?
No, we did not.
And did you find anything else, any other items? Did you find you were looking for firearm bullets, bullet casings, anything of that nature? Did you find anything like that in the house?
We found nothing like that in the house.
What was the one item, just so that the judge knows, what did you locate at the house? Or what was taken during the execution of this search warrant, I guess is a better question.
There was photographs were taken as far as through our standard operating procedure when we're executing the search warrant to show the status or the presence of the house prior to the search warrant, and anything that we would locate during the search warrant process, they would take photographs of that as well. Again, nothing was located, nothing was physically taken from inside the house. There were photographs taken of the residence before and after we left, and also for showing where we left a copy of the search warrant before we left for Reagan.
And so that additional information that you spoke of, in addition to what was in the affidavit and what you typed out, the magistrate judge had that additional information when considering whether or not probable cause existed to issue this search warrant.
He did.
All right. Judge, may I ask a procedural question from you? Do you want us to go into the second search warrant, or do you want to complete this first search warrant before we move on to the second?
Go ahead and do the other one too. I've got both of them out here.
All right, I'll go ahead and do that. Thank you. Sergeant LaCroix, back in February of 2017, did you seek out a search warrant for Matthew Baker's DNA?
I did.
All right. All right, this time I'm going to tender State's Exhibit 7, which is a certified copy of the application and affidavit for search and the search warrant for Matthew Baker's DNA. It is number 2017-73SW. May I approach the witness, Judge?
Sure.
Sergeant LaCroix, I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 7. Before I have him start reading from that, Judge, we're tendering that into evidence. It's a self-authenticating document.
Objection.
No objection.
That's what we do.
Thank you, Judge. Detective LaCroix, is that the search warrant that you sought out in January of 2017?
It is.
Okay. And at this point, in January of 17, did you put on there in the affidavit and application for that search warrant, did you put on there what items you were seeking to look for?
I did.
And what was that?
DNA evidence, for example, saliva and or blood.
Did you put on there what crime you were investigating?
I did.
And what was that?
Murder.
Did you put on there what location was to be searched?
I did.
Okay, and what was that?
I provided Matthew Baker's name, description, his date of birth, and also said that he was currently at the Henry County Jail, and provided the Henry County Jail's address, and also provided directions to the Henry County Jail from the starting point of the Henry County Police Department address on Zach Eaton Parkway.
On that same affidavit, did you put on there your background and your qualifications?
I did.
Did you put on there the probable cause that you were using and asking the judge to consider in seeking this search warrant?
I did.
Could you go ahead and read that into the record?
On October 27th, 2016, I responded to 635 Moccasin Gap Road, Jackson, Georgia, 30233, in reference to a person shot and called. I was advised by Sergeant Gothic that several people at the location had been shot. 3 subjects were deceased, with a 4th subject, being airlifted to the hospital, but was likely not to survive. There was a witness at the location, Mackenzie Jude Walton. Ms. Walton stated she was at the location with several friends just hanging out. Her half-brother, Jacob Cosby, was also at the location. Ms. Walton said at one point there was some sort of an argument between Jacob and some of the other 3 people who were identified as Jacob Williams, Brooke Knight, Kayla Head, and Matthew Baker, and Jacob was thought to have left. Sometime later, Ms. Walton stated she was on the back porch smoking a cigarette, and a car came down the driveway. She stated one of the people had left to take a female named Emily home. As she hears the vehicle, she stated she saw Jacob and another unknown male near the wood line near the residence. Shortly after that, she hears approximately 10 gunshots from inside the house. Ms. Walton stated she ran and hid in one of the outbuildings at the location. She states that she did not see if Jacob entered the house and had no knowledge of what went on inside the house. Sometime after this, Ms. Walton received a text from Jacob on her phone. The content of the text was to the effect of, "I'll let you go because I love you." Ms. Walton stated that she talked to Jacob on the phone and he told her that he had gone somewhere in Jackson, but supposedly no outright confession had been made. The owners of the location had said to be out of town and no one was supposed to be there. Another juvenile witness was at the location stated he was invited to the location by one of the victims. He got to the location, everyone was outside drinking beer and just kind of goofing off. He stated it got later in the evening, he had to work in the morning, so he went to sleep in the back bedroom of the house. He was awakened to the sounds of gunshots and a scream. The juvenile witness wrapped himself up in a blanket and hid in the room. He stated he saw Jacob with another unknown male come back down the hallway where he was shortly after the gunshots ceased. He stated the other male was wearing all black and looked like he had a mask on. He said he did not see who was actually shooting. Mr. Koski called 911 around 10:30 hours in an attempt to turn himself in. He stated he was on Jones Road and Chambers Road at a firehouse subs by the Henry County Sheriff's Department and brought to the Henry County Police Department headquarters for formal questioning. Mr. Koski was read his Miranda rights and waived and agreeing to speak to myself and Cage Agent Gleason. During this interview, Mr. Koski admitted to shooting all 4 subjects and leaving the location with Matthew Baker, Jacob Williams, Brooke Knight, and a female named Kayla who was driving. An interview with Mr. Baker uncovered that Mr. Baker admitted to meeting Mr. Koski back at the incident location, entering the house with Mr. Koski, watching the 4 victims being shot, searching the location for other people, and leaving with Mr. Koski. I'm attempting to collect Mr. Baker's DNA evidence, or DNA, for furtherance into the investigation of this case.
And when you prepared this affidavit and presented this affidavit to, and this was presented to Judge, is it Shannon?
Judge Wesley Shannon.
Okay. And when you swore this out before Judge Shannon, were you under oath?
I was.
Okay. And did you give any additional information to the judge with regards to other information that you'd obtained during your investigation?
Just anything as far as clarification questions, any clarification questions or anything as far as that you can understand as far as my wording inside the warrant.
Okay.
I don't remember anything specifically.
Okay. And now, was the DNA evidence that you were seeking from Mr. Baker, was that intended to be compared with DNA that was found within the house where the murders occurred?
It was.
And did you let the judge know that?
I did.
That's all the questions I have, Judge.
Ross? Thank you, Judge. Afternoon, Sergeant LaCroix. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm doing well about yourself.
Doing all right. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Thank you. I don't have too many questions for you. So if we could, I want to start first with the search warrant for Mr. Baker's home.
Okay.
For that 3300 Highway 81 East.
Okay.
And so you had this entire affidavit prepared before you went to go see the judge?
I did.
And this was the one that you got from Judge Brown?
Correct.
Right. Okay. And you testified earlier that the only additional information you gave was in response to the judge's question for clarification?
Any sort of clarification questions that they would have. It's, at that time, to that point of my experience within CID, it was not uncommon time as far as they would read our affidavits and something would pop in the judge's mind, something that they would want to know, they would ask clarification questions. The situation was no different.
Okay. And do you recall specifically which clarification questions Judge Brown had?
Not specifically as far as verbatim. I know there was questions as far as, he asked questions as far as if there was any contradictory information that was provided through any of the other interviews, whether it was Mr. Baker or any of the other ones.
Okay. Well, let's start there. In your response to the judge, what did you tell him about contradictory information?
I told Judge Brown said that Mr. Baker admitted to me that they were called back to the location, that he did enter the house of Mr. Koski, but had no knowledge of the extent of what was going to happen, but was in the house with him, did walk down the hallway with him, and did leave the house with him. I guess you say the contradictory aspect of it as far as from the affidavit was Koski's statement was that Mr. Baker was holding on to one of the guns, and when Mr. Koski emptied the one gun, he took the other gun from Mr. Baker. Mr. Baker's statement was that he never had a weapon in his hand.
And where in the affidavit does it talk about Mr. Koski getting one of the guns from Mr. Baker?
Mr. Baker found it.
Yeah. Yeah. However much time you need to find that.
Hope I don't have to search for it. This is find this specific term in this one. Okay, I'm not seeing that statement, the statement as far as Mr. Koski about the weapons actually being in the affidavit for the search warrant in the house.
So, to be clear, because I think the statement you had made was specifically that Mr. Koski had said that he fired from one weapon, and when that weapon ran out of ammunition, he took the other gun from Mr. Baker, correct?
So that's what he told me in the interview, yes.
Sure, and I'm not trying to trap you or anything. To be real clear, this affidavit was drafted on October the 27th of 2016, correct?
It was.
And that was also when it was signed by the judge. It was October the 27th of 2016.
That's correct.
That's the same day that these murders happened, correct?
That's correct.
And so I understand you have been involved in numerous interviews over the course of the day.
Yes.
Or numerous investigative steps.
Right, yeah, the more investigative steps in interviews, primarily the interviews throughout the day were with a substantial amount of time with Mr. Koski and then, speaking with Mr. Baker, but, yes, most investigative steps.
Okay, and so you had initially responded to Moccasin Gap Road, correct?
I did.
And what time was that, approximately?
2, 3 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call that woke me up, so I knew it was early morning hours.
And this was on the 27th?
Yes.
And so you did investigation there. You then also went to 3300 Highway 81 East.
Yes, sir.
And do you recall what time were you dispatched out there?
Maybe sometime around 10 o'clock in the morning.
And then following that, did you go to the police department?
We did.
And that was where you were involved in other investigative actions, including a lengthy interview with Mr. Koski.
Correct.
And an interview with Mr. Baker.
Correct.
And so you had also been informed of interviews with other people that you yourself had not conducted.
Correct.
But you were aware of what other people had told your other officers.
Correct.
So you have a lot of information
Correct.
going on in your head, correct? And so while you may have had that information regarding Mr. Koski saying he got a gun from Mr. Baker,
Yes.
that did not end up making it into this specific affidavit.
I don't say it directly in this affidavit, no, sir.
And so, contained in this affidavit, I know you had read it earlier, you had just kind of talked about your initial investigation at Moccasin Gap Road and what you found out there. Is that fair?
Yes, sir.
And so, I know you said that, I think I heard you say that Judge Brown had asked specifically what information you got from Mr. Baker. Was that?
If anything, I say, when we say contradictory, like anything as far as that's completely out of line from where the investigative, where we were leading as far as where we've been at.
So he was asking what was contradictory to what Mr. Baker had said?
Like, was there any information as far as that I'd obtained, whether it be from anywhere else as far as speaking with Mr. Baker, that would be not in line from the confession as far as from what we got from Mr. Koski or from what the scene has shown?
Okay. And so you had told the judge, and I think this is also similar to what's in the affidavit, was that Mr. Baker had said that he had entered the home, but that was pretty much it, aside from his version of his statement. Is that fair?
Say as far as in the affidavit? Or speaking, or asking, or answering to clarify?
Sure. Well, let's start with in the affidavit, and then tell us what you told the judge specifically.
Okay. Find it directly in here as far as.
Yeah, I think where in the affidavit, I think it was towards the end when you were talking specifically about the statements from Mr. Baker.
See, as far as where we are from here. Talk about here, says, when Matthew Baker returned to the infant by Kayla Head and the other following passengers were dropped off in front of the driveway at the address. And then we go back into Mr. Koski's statements from going into the house, committing the actual act, telling Mr. Baker to help him search. And that was the last, as far as the actually the affidavit, those two areas, as far as an actual statement from Mr. Baker, where the rest, as far as the affidavit was Koski's statements tying everything else in. And then again, excuse me, again, the clarification questions when Judge Brown, speaking with Judge Brown, it was Mr. Baker did state, yeah, he went in the house with Mr. Koski, he did see this happen, and he did leave with him.
Okay, so the clarification questions were, Mr. Baker went in the house, saw what happened, and left with Koski.
Well, yes, question to Judge Brown, he wanted clarification in his head to understand
Okay.
everything that was in there.
And so it was also in your affidavit, you know, that Mr. Koski was the one that shot all 4 of the victims in this case.
Correct.
And your affidavit stated that Mr. Koski confesses to coming in the residence with 2 revolver firearms, correct?
Correct.
And also, by the time that you had applied for this search warrant, you had already recovered 1 of the firearms, correct?
At the time of the petition for this search warrant, Mr. Koski, we were actually able to locate, I believe it was the weapon at the fridge. Did he, I can check and see.
Yeah, towards the end there's a paragraph
Yeah.
that starts.
One of the weapons that Mr. Koski had stated that he had offered to show where it was at, so other officers went with him to show where that weapon was at, and that one had been recovered. The outstanding was still one of the weapons, and again, as far as looking for the clothing Mr. Baker stated he was wearing.
And to be clear, I think this was all in the affidavit. So you have two firearms used in this crime, correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Koski had told you during his interview that he threw them out of the window or on the side of the road at 2 separate locations.
2 separate locations, as they were driving, he disposed of the weapons.
And he told you generally what area of the county they were in when he tossed them out the window.
He did, and about as general as you could be, because
Right.
he didn't really quite know where he was at.
And then, but officers searched, and I think maybe Koski helped, but you found one of those.
The one main area that was more specific where he was at, where he was dropped off at, he was more specific about that, because that was where he knew where he was at, where we found that Newton County PD had gotten in contact with him, so we knew that area where he was talking about.
And then had not been able to recover the other weapon from the.
At the time of petition for this search warrant, yes, the other weapon had not been recovered, and really had no idea where it was at.
Aside from where Mr. Koski told you it was.
Correct. Well,
So, I mean, you had
somewhere within the area of Henry County from where the incident occurred, or from where he was found.
I mean, did he say he tossed it inside Mr. Baker's home?
He just said he tossed it.
But he
He did not say specifically that he tossed it inside 3300 Highway 81 East.
Well, in fact, he specifically said it wasn't inside a home, did he?
Correct.
I mean, he said he threw it out the window of a car.
He did, yes.
And I think we can all agree, not out of the window of a car into Mr. Baker's home.
Correct.
Then if we could turn to that second search warrant for Mr. Baker's DNA.
Okay.
And so this was, that first search warrant, that was October 2016, the night of the incident.
Yes,
The first
the search warrant for the residence was the actual night of the incident, yes.
And so this one for the DNA, though, for Mr. Baker's DNA, this was several months later, February of 2017.
February of 2017 is when this one was petitioned for, yes.
And a different judge, I think you said Judge Shannon.
Shannon.
And was this kind of the same situation as that first search warrant, where you present the affidavit, you know, obviously sworn under oath, I think you had said, and then answered clarification questions?
Any clarification questions that a judge would have, excuse me, we would respond to those.
And do you recall what specific clarification questions Judge Shannon had regarding this search warrant?
I don't remember anything as far as specifically. I know as far as he was, you know, kind of describing the scene inside the house as far as what we saw with blood and things along as far as those lines. I don't remember any specific questions as far as any direct line correlation type questions.
So do you recall what information that's not contained in the affidavit, what other information did you give to Judge Shannon?
Are you describing the scene as far as what we're talking about to the judge so we understand as far as what brought us to this point, you know, where we have a lot of young adults having a party, everything goes sideways, we get inside the house, we see as far as what's in the house, there's beer bottles everywhere, things along these lines. We're trying to either identify possible DNA evidence or eliminate possible DNA evidence from inside the house to see if we're missing any other players or whatever the situation may be.
And did you tell the judge if you had collected any DNA evidence at that point?
If I remember correctly, there had been, I want to say that there had been some swabs taken from beer bottles inside the residence near the little kitchenette area. But again, without going through the entire file again at this point, I don't remember exactly. But if I want to say correctly, we swabbed the inside of some of the drink containers in the kitchenette area where 4 bodies were located.
And so those were your investigative steps.
That's the investigative step.
Collecting possible trace DNA.
Because at that point in the investigation, all we had were, I guess you say suggestions. There was nothing as far as affirmative yet saying that was, Ms. Walton had not yet affirmatively stated anything as far as about Mr. Koski or anything. It was these people were here, these people were here, these people left, and then all of a sudden this stuff went crazy.
And so did you inform the judge about outstanding DNA at that point?
I did.
And what specifically did you tell the judge?
Excuse me. I told Judge Shannon we were also looking as far as I don't remember the date or if we did the search warrant for the same day or the day or prior. We also did a DNA search warrant as far as on Mr. Koski, as far as his involvement. And anything that we would get from the GBI for anything that we submitted for any unknown people that we have at the time, out of the ones that were not identified, if any other DNA would come up that would identify witnesses, person of interest from there would be, would seek forward from there.
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding you. You made it clear to the judge that there were at that point specific items that you wanted to have compared to somebody's DNA.
Yes.
And that would have been.
Or you compare, not just specifically comparison to DNA, comparison to a specific person's DNA, but see if there's DNA evidence of anyone that might give us an idea who else would have been in the house, if other witnesses, suspects, anything along those lines.
I think I understand what you're saying. And again, I know there's a good bit of overlap between the two affidavits, but they are not identical.
They're not.
And I think there was a little bit more information in that first affidavit versus the affidavit for the DNA, correct?
The last paragraph of the DNA search warrant is not the same as the last paragraph as far as the search warrant in the house.
And kind of same thing though, in this one for the DNA in the affidavit, it explains that Mr. Koski admitted to being the one who murdered all 4 victims, correct?
Yes.
And I think it states that that after interviews with Mr. Baker and other people, actually, let me rephrase that. After an interview with Mr. Baker, that Mr. Baker admitted to being at the location, correct?
Correct.
And that he had viewed the house and had seen what happened.
Yes.
Okay, one moment. And then, so as a result of this, you did obtain Mr. Baker's DNA.
I did.
And was that compared to anything, any samples of anything?
Everything as far as, excuse me, it was sent in with the other DNA items as far as for GBI comparison. Or GBI testing, I guess is the best way to put that.
And just to clarify, when you say sent in, what you're talking about is to the GBI crime lab?
It's sent directly to the GBI crimes lab on Panthersville Road.
And because that is just the agency that does that DNA testing.
Right. We do not have the equipment in-house at Henry County Police Department to do the DNA testing.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sergeant LaCroix, when you were talking with defense about the search warrant for Matthew Baker's home, you specifically were talking about contradictory information that the judge had asked you about. And you were looking specifically to see whether or not it was in the affidavit regarding Koski saying that he got the second firearm from this defendant, Matthew Baker.
Correct.
And you were not able to find it in the affidavit, is that correct?
Looking at it, I'm still not seeing it.
Okay.
In this affidavit. That's what it was.
But is that information that was contradictory that you did provide to the judge?
No. I'm sorry. It was contradictory to Mr. Baker's statement.
Yes.
But that's tied into the reason as far as we're looking as far as within the search warrant, as far as the inconsistency within the statement.
Okay, so even though it wasn't in the search warrant in the affidavit, was that information when the judge was asking you about contradictory statements that people had given, was that one of the pieces of information that you gave the judge that we have these contradictory statements?
Yes.
Okay, is that a clearer question?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought, I misunderstood, I'm sorry.
Okay. So when Judge Brown was considering whether or not to issue this search warrant, was Judge Brown aware that Matthew Baker said he didn't have a firearm, but Jacob Koski said that Matthew Baker did have a firearm?
Judge, I'm going to object. That calls for speculation. He can clearly talk about what he told the judge. He can talk about the statements that he made, but he is not in a position to talk about what the judge was aware of or was not aware of.
Well, I don't know whether Jensen has gotten information from anyone else, so that would be clear to ask the question more directly. If you did you make Judge Brown aware of that particular inconsistency?
I did, sir, yes.
Okay. Does that answer your question about the objection? Now, the way the question was phrased, was Judge Brown aware of it? Now, unless Judge Brown was sleeping during his testimony, he would be aware of what he told him. I'm going to assume the magistrate don't sleep while considering getting a search warrant in a murder case. Okay? And that's a fairly reasonable assumption. That clarifies the objection.
Thank you.
Not with grand objection, because obviously he testified and told him of that discrepancy when he was asked. Next question.
Thank you, Judge. During the course of your investigation, do you recall whether or not the young women who were interviewed, Kayla Head and Brooke Knight, whether or not they indicated whether or not Jacob Koski had thrown anything out the window?
Both Ms. Head and Ms. Knight said they had no knowledge of what happened once they got to the vehicle, as they were both. Ms. Head was driving, Ms. Blue was supposed to be the front seat passenger with Mr. Williams, Mr. Koski, Mr. Baker in the back seat. Neither of the females said that they saw anything thrown out the windows.
Was that contradictory? Because does that contradict what Jacob Koski says?
It does.
Okay.
Because Mr. Koski stated at one point he did throw one of the weapons out of the moving vehicle as they were driving away.
Do you recall, did you provide that contradictory information to Judge Brown as well?
I do.
That's all the questions I have, Judge. Thank you.
So, I mean, when you're writing these affidavits for a search warrant, you're trying to include as much information as possible, right?
Correct.
Like, you're not trying to leave things out.
I'm not putting the full investigation to this point within there, but I'm trying to put information in there that I feel that would establish the probable cause for why I'm searching for what I'm searching.
So when you're drawing up the affidavit, you want any information that could establish probable cause, you want that to be included in your affidavit.
Correct.
Because you want to make sure the judge is aware of that.
Correct.
And I think we could probably agree that a statement from Mr. Koski that Mr. Baker gave him one of the guns would be an important statement, right?
It would be.
I don't think that's what the evidence is. He gave him one of them. Mr. Koski took one from his hand. And what I understood Mr. Koski's statement was.
It was, Mr. Koski's statement was that he turned, yes, when the first gun was empty, he turned and took the other gun from Mr. Baker and then used it.
Okay, and then to make sure the record's clear and to clarify, that Mr. Koski got one of the guns from Mr. Baker, right? Not that Mr. Baker nudged him on the shoulder and said, here, take this, but that Mr. Koski turned around and took a gun that Mr. Baker was holding.
That was Mr. Koski's statement, yes.
Right. And so, I mean, would you agree that it might be important to put into the affidavit any statement that actually put a gun into Mr. Baker's hand?
From my aspect of it, as far as from searching within the house, what we put was there was still that weapon that was missing. We knew Mr. Koski was in the vehicle with Mr. Baker and his other subjects. Not to take Mr. Koski's statement at complete face value that everything he said was correct. There's no way that this gun is in Mr. Baker's house. It's on the side of the road somewhere in Jackson to Newton County, Forest, or whatever. That we know there was a second party involved with whatever level of involvement inside the house. We know Mr. Koski said there was 2 guns. At this point in time, the secondary gun is missing. From the time the incident occurred to the time we made contact with Mr. Baker in his driveway, we're talking anywhere from 6 to 8 hours as far as the past. Looking as far as the possibility that to cover bases for areas that we knew they were at, to search not only with the clothing that Mr. Baker, admitted as far as he was wearing, but to cover the base and make sure as far as this other murder weapon is not being stashed in what at the moment was listed as could possibly be listed with any of the other subjects that were inside this vehicle that went from dropping Koski off back at Mr. Baker's house. Is that somewhat clear?
Yes and no. I understand where you come from, and
I gathered from that is that the reason you did the affidavit the way it was done, you weren't seeking an arrest warrant for Mr. Baker.
No.
In this affidavit, you were seeking to make sure that there was nothing missing that might find the weapon, which is available for anyone to pick up and utilize and dispose of, that might have evidence contained on it for DNA.
Yes.
Or any other information that they provide, as well as, but you also include clothing. So if you want to get Mr. Baker's clothing to prove he was there, you want to get most information from the magistrate that said he in fact had touched a gun, and this might be the one he actually touched.
Yes.
but so you did not feel important enough to put in your affidavit that
At that time, putting the warrant, I wasn't thinking to that extent as far as the touching of the weapon. It was where there were items that were unaccounted for that we knew as far as that were involved in looking in areas where people who were in some level involved resided to check and make sure those items, specifically the firearm, was not there, and to see if we could locate again the clothing that Mr. Baker stated he was wearing.
And, I mean, to be clear, you also said you weren't taking everything that Mr. Koski said at face value, but he had actually given you the location of one of the guns, and that information you used to recover that gun.
That information where he actually led our officers to that secondary weapon, yes. To the area, I should say, so searching and found it.
No further questions.
Anything else from the state?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
For my clarification purposes, how many statements did Mr. Costi give in the course of this investigation?
Approximately a 3.5 hour interview, myself and Agent Gleason.
Essentially, one statement will appear 3.5 hours.
Yes, sir.
All of that was prior to October 27, 2016 at 10:02 p.m.
The statements that Mr. Costi gave us were after 10:02. We first made contact with Mr. Baker in his driveway.
Wait a minute, this says 10:02 p.m.
Oh, 10:02 p.m., I'm sorry, yes. Those statements, I'm sorry, yeah. The statements that Mr. Costi gave us were prior to filing of the search warrant at the house of Mr. Baker at 10:02 p.m., yes, sir.
And a gun had been found prior to the issuance of the search warrant.
Yes, sir.
And it was the one identified as being thrown off the bridge into the river.
Right there at 212 where he was, said he got out of, yes, in that area, yes, sir.
But it actually wasn't in the river.
That was not correct.
Didn't know whether he was truthful in throwing one out the window, correct?
Correct.
But he was in the back seat, according to all the information you have. Mr.
Yes.
Costi was he.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Williams was in that back seat.
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Baker was in that back seat.
Yes, sir.
He didn't get out the window, it had to go out one or the other.
Correct.
Jeep Cherokee has 2 rear windows.
Yes, sir.
Do you know where Mr. Costi was seated in that back seat?
I want to say that he was behind the backseat passenger. When I spoke with Mr. Baker at our headquarters, I asked Mr. Baker where they were sitting in the vehicle. If I remember correctly, Mr. Baker stated he was sitting behind Miss Ed who was driving. So that would either, I don't remember specifically, I don't remember specifically the other two. So that would put either Mr. Costi as the backseat passenger behind Miss Knight, or somehow the middle seat passenger beside Mr. Williams. Considering the speed that they got in the vehicle, I would, if Mr. Baker is behind his head, Mr. Costi would have been behind Miss Knight, which would have put him on the backseat passenger side.
And Williams didn't know.
And Williams in the middle.
But neither one of those said they knew whether he threw it out the window or not.
No, sir.
Alright, so essentially you have one statement from Mr. Costi, which indicates in that statement that Mr. Baker had possession of one of the firearms at some point.
Yes.
Although he also, in the affidavit, indicated that he took both, Mr. Costi being he, took the 2 revolvers into the residence.
Yes, sir. Mr. Koski stated that he initially took both the weapons from the residence himself. Stole them, yes, sir. And that he had them on himself when Mr. Baker arrived. And then at some point, I don't remember the actual wording, if he handed him one here, just hold on to that, or however, but at some point, he said when he emptied the one gun that was in his hand, he turned around and took the other gun from Mr. Baker, and however many more shots from that weapon was used.
According to your affidavit of October 27, 2016, stated that Mr. Costi confessed to coming into the residence with 2 revolver firearms. He previously stole from the residence the day prior.
Yes, sir.
So at some point you're saying after he got in the residence, he said he gave Mr. Baker one of the weapons.
Yes, sir.
But that didn't make it into the affidavit.
No, sir.
Even though it was in your knowledge.
Yes, sir.
Was that ever told to the magistrate?
It was.
Any further questions, prompted by the fourth question?
No, Your Honor.
I got a clarification on to make sure there wasn't some other statement made after the fact. All right, well, that's all I have. This gentleman step down,
Yes, Your Honor.
you can step down.
Thank you, sir.
Got you off before midnight. But you still may be working till midnight.
Yeah, when I forward the list, I'll change uniforms and go to work. I'll leave these with.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Anybody else will testify?
No, Your Honor.
Anything the defense will put up, and I have to, we'll just always ask the question.
We do not have any witnesses or any evidence to put up regarding this matter.
Y'all, obviously we have only one issue before the court to be decided today, it's not dependent on the other, I don't suppose. Is there an argument, or y'all will wait for a summation and I've done this in a lot of my civil cases recently, only because it's pushed up toward the end of the day, we're not at the end of the day. I've let them have an opportunity to make a written closing argument because it allows them to make better focus, make sure they don't miss anything. And sometimes when you don't get focused, you talk on and on, y'all individually, but lawyers can tend to talk on and on and on to make sure they don't forget something. And inevitably we always do. If they are able to sit down and look over their notes and go through what their notes indicate the testimony was and the issues before the court, they can better summarize and not so lengthy document. But it's your choice. If y'all want to argue the closing down, fine, I'm going to be here. So.
I'm fine doing it today. Judge, from my perspective, I'm fine with just going forward today.
Okay.
Don't expect it to be a lengthy argument one way or the other.
All right.
Before we argue, could we take a 10-minute break?
Sure. 10-minute break will be appropriate at this time of the afternoon at whatever time I got, 2:37 p.m. We'll take a 10-minute break at 2:47.
Thank you.
How'd you break it? Why are we breaking the furniture?
Here's what happened. I forgot my mask, so I'll talk like this. So Paul, I sent all the transcripts in a very timely manner, early as a matter of fact. Paul sent the Owen one to Karen for her to file the original. She assumed, because it was right on the invoice, to send a copy to you and a copy to them, that he had sent you a copy also. He had not, because he thought she would give you the copy. So it's there, it's been there all along, but it just hasn't gotten to you. But I'm gonna contact him and tell him to send you everything with Baker, and that'll take care of that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Did someone just go back there?
Yep.
I'll go this way.